right now, for the 11 million people living in Cuba, a crisis that's been simmering for years has finally hit a boiling point. The entire nation is teetering on the brink of a massive economic collapse. In this explainer, we're going to break down exactly how they got here and what it all means for the people living through it every single day.
So forget any picture postcard images you might have of Cuba. The daily reality for millions is a grinding struggle for the most basic things. I mean, for a lot of people, once the sun sets, the only light they have is from the glow of their phone screen.
And just how bad is it? We're talking about a recent nationwide blackout that plunged up to 70% of the island into total darkness. That's a huge chunk of the population left with absolutely no power for days on end. So to really get what this crisis feels like, let's take a look at what life is like on the ground for everyday Cubans. And look, this goes way beyond just electricity. Take the story of Aidana Acosta. Her family, that's 4 people, gets a single bucket of water. And that one bucket has to last them 10 days. Think about that. That's for everything: cooking, bathing, drinking. It just shows you how incredibly dire these shortages have become.
So you have to ask, what was the tipping point? What pushed this long-running problem into a full-blown catastrophic emergency? Well, it all boils down to one thing: oil.
You see, for a long time, Cuba's struggling economy was basically being kept afloat by a lifeline from its ally, Venezuela. We're talking about nearly half of the island's entire oil supply. This wasn't just a nice-to-have, it was absolutely essential to keeping the country running.
And then, just like that, the lifeline was cut. After Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro was captured, and with a whole lot of pressure from the U.S., those oil shipments to Cuba just stopped. And the impact? It was immediate and it was devastating. And this wasn't some accident. The policy was made crystal clear by the Trump administration, with the president saying flat out, no more oil or money going to Cuba. It was a deliberate move to sever that economic support system.
So what does that actually mean for people on the ground? According to one energy expert, Jorge Pon, it's a total collapse. I mean, without diesel, public transit just stops. Tractors can't run, which completely kneecaps their agriculture. This one fuel shortage created a massive domino effect that's now paralyzing the whole country. But here's the thing. That Venezuelan oil crisis, that was just the spark that lit the fuse. The truth is, the foundations of Cuba's economy have been incredibly shaky for a very, very long time. So let's zoom out and look at that bigger picture. So when you try to figure out why Cuba is in this mess, you basically run into 2 completely different stories. On one side, you have the Cuban government. They point the finger directly at the decades-long U.S. trade embargo, saying it's strangled their economy. But on the other side, you've got U.S. policymakers like Marco Rubio who say, no, the blame lies with the failures of communist mismanagement from within. Okay, so politics aside for a second, there are some really deep systemic problems that are undeniably part of the equation. We're talking about widespread corruption, infrastructure that is literally crumbling, an economy that's been on life support, and, of course, being cut off from much of the world. And the human cost of all this, it's just staggering. According to one human rights group, a mind-blowing 89% of Cuban households are now living in extreme poverty. And to give you some context on what extreme means here, the average monthly salary for a Cuban worker is just $16. That's $16 for a whole month's work. Right, so this crisis isn't just happening in isolation. We need to look at the bigger geopolitical chessboard to see how international powers are really shaping what's happening in Cuba. So the U.S. took a huge step to basically lock in that oil cutoff. They declared a national emergency, which gave them the power to slap tariffs on any country that tried to step in and supply oil to Cuba. It was a move designed to tighten that economic vice even further. And a really key figure driving this policy is Senator Marco Rubio. You have to understand, for him, this is deeply personal. He's a Cuban American, the son of exiles, and he represents that powerful anti-communist community in Miami. He is absolutely convinced that the regime itself, not the embargo, is the real source of the Cuban people's suffering. Which brings us to a really interesting question. With Venezuela out of the game, where are Cuba's other allies? I mean, experts are pretty surprised that historical partners like Russia haven't sent more help, or that a big oil exporter like Brazil hasn't stepped in. Their absence from this picture is a really big piece of the puzzle.
So, with all these big powers making their moves, the focus comes right back to the Cuban people, who are now facing a future that feels more dangerous and uncertain than ever before.
And they are not just sitting back and waiting. Even with the very real threat of a heavy-handed government crackdown, people are still protesting. We're seeing these sporadic demonstrations popping up, continuing the momentum from those huge protests back in July 2021 when thousands demanded change. And this quote from Dr. Maria de los Anjos Torres, wow, it just perfectly sums up how fragile everything is. She says, Cuban society right now is built on matchsticks, and that any little thing could make the whole thing go up in flames in a minute.
And that leaves us with the final, deeply unsettling question. The system is at its breaking point. The people are at their limit. The future for 11 million people is completely up in the air. What on earth happens when those matchsticks finally give way?